Is Road Hookless a scam? As I said, let's dig in and find out. All right. Hey, everybody. Josh from SILCA here after, it's been a long week. Sometimes I'm sure you've had the feeling you say something and then you kind of put your foot in your mouth and you're like, should I have said that? Well, I don't know, 2 weeks ago on Marginal Gains Podcast, I said something and I kind of realized at the time, people aren't going to like me saying that. And, here we are. We've had multiple news media outlets in cycling, Velo News, the Outside Magazine people, Bike Radar. I think there's 3 YouTube videos now, and it's been on at least 2 podcasts. But I said that I thought Road Hookless was a scam.
Too, and that's the hookless dilemma, I'm calling it here, Josh. This question comes from Mike Thompson, who wrote on the comments section of the Marginal Gains podcast. He says that he thinks that we've driven him to be more of a marginal gain seeker than I was before listening to you. That's great to hear, Mike. That's why the show is here in the first place. He says, with the new Hunt Sub 50 wheel set, he was excited and pre-ordered the wheels after reading everything about them, including a white paper. Man, he's good. As I did a deeper dive into hookless and pressure limitations considering my current setup, which is a Bontrager tubeless tires with a 25 mil measuring 28 at the front and a 28 mil tire on the rear that now measures at the 30 to try to balance aero and rolling resistance. Now, he's trying to keep within that rule of 105 that we've professed here on the show, always using the SILCA calculator to dial his tire pressures. It didn't seem like I would be able to meet pressures required for ideal rolling resistance with the hookless wheels. 65 psi max with the 30 mil tire and 72 with the 28s. Based on the calculator with my current setup, he ran 76 front and 70 in the rear. He asks, does the increased aero benefits of hookless overshadow the increased rolling resistance you might get because you're having to run lower pressures than ideally you would want?
This is a good question, and I apologize ahead of time to Mike because nobody's going to like this answer. There's no increased aero benefit to hookless rims. That has been postulated and theorized by brands making hookless rims. It's just not true. It does not pan out in the real world. We've never once seen it to be true in an actual wind tunnel doing actual testing. So, so I hate to say that, but that's just the truth. So no aero benefit. In some cases, in a lot of cases actually, there's probably an aero detriment because it makes the tire actually measure a little bit wider than it otherwise would, making it not possible to meet the rule of 105 in almost all instances. And unfortunately, he's run the 25 millimeter front tire. You can't run that. That's a really dangerous thing to do on those wheels.
And so I've had to put a lot of thought to it because my inbox, as I projected, is quite full with people who are not happy from the industry about that. And, also full from the media and customers and bike shops and all sorts of people wanting to know, did you mean it like that? It's been a hard one. So big week. Had really put some thought into what I'm going to say on this video today. So is Road Hookless a scam? As I said, just for starters, those of you who listen to the Marginal Gains podcast, we have a really unique way of doing things over there. And just as I do all these videos direct to tape, no script, no anything like that. Occasionally, we'll have notes or whatever. But Hottie and Fatty write a script for the Marginal Gains podcast. And then I get it when I get on the podcast with them. So it comes up on the screen, and a script looks we'll put one up. Phil will put one on the screen for you to kind of see. And heck, we can put up the actual question as it was asked. And what we've learned from the very beginning, we tried to have scripts, and I tried to write stuff, and then I would be like I was reading it, and it just didn't work, right? I'm not good at acting. I'm not good at remembering things that are written down. But I do okay just kind of talking off the cuff. So the way that show goes down, they ask the question. It is literally the first time I'm seeing it. I'm generally reading it on the screen as Fatty or Hottie are talking. And then I have to come up with something to say. every once in a while we do have like a gap where I'm like, I need 15 seconds to think of how I'm going to word this. Sometimes, shit just comes out of the mouth. So this one was an interesting one about these new Hunt Limitless hookless wheels. And I think I got a little bit triggered because the customer who sent in the question, this is a very well thought out question from this person. He had the wheels, he had done the research, put all the work in, and then ended up putting a front tire on for good, solid aerodynamic reasons that was actually an unsafe tire for that wheel. And I think that's what just pushed me over the edge. This is not, random person who's not doing the research just, making a poor decision. This is somebody who's really trying to do everything as correctly as possible, putting themselves in a potentially dangerous spot. Let's get into kind of, what this is. So the Hunt Limitless hookless rim that he's talking about is quite interesting. They have solved sort of some of the aero issues with hookless. And I know everybody says it's more aero. It is not more aero. Every time we've tested it, it's not more aero. And one of the reasons it's not more aero is that the tire sits out wider in a hookless rim because there's no hook holding it, keeping it inward. And so in most cases, you can't match the rule of 105. You can't get the tire narrow enough to allow the rim to really work. So what Hunt has done, which is quite clever, is they've actually made the hookless bead much thicker so that it sort of approximates the thickness of a hooked bead so that the outer rim surface is further out in the airflow as it would be in a hooked configuration. So I actually would think of this, kind of my description of it, it's basically the geometry of a hooked profile, just with all the area under the hook filled in to make it hookless. So this does solve some of the aerodynamic issues caused by hookless rims, and so we just want to be straight on that. Companies who make hookless say it's faster. It's never faster. They're super mad at me for saying that, but it's just true. We've never seen it be as fast because you end up with a tire that's almost always too wide for that rim. So I think this is a clever way of doing things for Hunt, but where the confusion was with our Marginal Gains listener, he said on this rim with, I think it's a 23 millimeter inner, he was running a 25 front, 28 rear for the optimal aerodynamics of that front tire. And you cannot run a 25 millimeter tire on a 23 millimeter inner width. Now, what caught him out was the 25 millimeter tire on that rim when installed measured at 28, right? Because it's a little bit wider. Most of the companies out there are still quoting their tire sidewall width relative to 17 or 19 millimeter rim inner widths. And so, a 25 that would be 25 on a 17 or a 19 is going to be 26, 27, 28 when it's mounted on the much wider rim. Now, why this is dangerous is that as the tire widens out, you actually need, and we'll throw up a diagram here that Phil made for me, and actually put this in an email to the Bike Radar guys and the Velo News guys, a number of other people. So you'll probably be seeing this graphic in a bunch of places. But with hookless, you need the tire to be wider than the rim because, air pressure on the tire acts radial to the tire itself. And so you need that tire to wrap around and actually be coming inward as it gets to the hook so that you have some radially inward force. As the tire gets wider and wider, it starts to approximate more, we'll call it like 180 degrees of tire. And now all of the forces are radially outward or directly lateral. And why that's a problem is that in a hookless wheel, you do have air under the bead itself. It's one of the actually interesting things with hookless, that hookless rims have more radial compression from air pressure that reduces spoke tension when compared to old school rims used with tubes. And it's because the tube will cover off that gap there. And so the air pressure only acts on the inner part between the beads when you're using a tube, but it acts over the whole width of the bed when you're using tubeless. So, but in the same way that it's acting radially inward on the rim bed under the bead, it's pushing directly radially outward on the bead itself. And so all of the forces here as the tire becomes smaller relative to the rim, are all acting to push that tire off the rim, which is just not safe. You need the tire to be wider and a good bit wider than the rim so that you have some of these radially inward forces just above the bead where the tire's beginning to bulge out. Hopefully that's clear in the diagram. Hopefully it's clear in the words that I've said. So we would see with hooked rims, you can generally safely get to 125% of the max stated air pressure when you have a tire that is 3 millimeters wider than the inner bead width of the rim. So you could put call it a 26 on a 23. You could put a 28 on a 25, and you could still get to 125% of the blow-off pressure of that tire. That's important. We like to think in safety factors as engineers. If you have 100 psi sidewall pressure limit, we need there to be something above that, for safety factor. So 125 psi would be the blow-off minimum that you would want to go with that traditionally. Now, the problem with Hookless is that we've sort of set this arbitrary 72 psi maximum, but it doesn't change with tire size or volume. And then you have differences in people's pumps, and you have differences in the temperature when you pump the tire up versus when we're riding in the hot desert. And so all of these other things, they're trying to kind of build that in. The problem we have with Hookless here is when we do rolling resistance testing, we've actually had a handful of tires blow off of rims in the 78 to 80 psi range, and that is just not far enough above the 72. So, you think of your typical inexpensive bike pump is a plus minus 5% gauge from the factory. So it could be off as much as 5% one direction or the other from the factory. So, if you pump to 72, if all that 5% is in one direction, that probably puts you in the 75, 76, give or take range. And then you think, well, if you're 76, but you think it's 72, you're doing the right thing as the customer. That's awfully close to the sun if that is a combo that may actually come off at 78 or 80. And then, you pump up in your garage and it's cool in the morning and you go ride and the ground is hot, the sun is baking down. Air pressure rises about 1 psi for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So, if you start at, say 72, it's nice in the morning and it's cool. The sun comes out, the road starts to get hot. All of a sudden, your tire itself is, say, 100 degrees, which is not at all uncommon. That move from 70 to 100, that could raise you another 3 psi. And so it just keeps pushing us closer and closer to the sun. So that's where I feel like it's just too risky when you consider that there's honestly no real technological benefit to it, right? The Hookless is not more aerodynamic. It typically is not really lighter when you look at the products that are out there. It's typically not any more impact resistant when you look at the products that are out there. But it does bring these risks along with it. And so those are my key issues when I really think about that. Now, let's talk, that's for road. So would I ride Hookless road? No, I won't. I don't recommend it. I don't want to work with teams who have it. We have a lot of discussions around that, like, hey, I don't want to be any part of a tire pressure optimization or any sort of performance optimization in those instances because it is just a bit too risky. And in some cases, it does put us into spots that you're having to choose a technically incorrect tire or less optimal tire because of the Hookless rim and not because of the day, the race, the course, right? The pavement condition, the rider. You're having to make decisions that are suboptimal. I think a good example here is the Vittoria 29 millimeter tire to work with the 24 millimeter Hookless rims that are out there. You see that we really, you need at least 4 millimeter larger tire sidewall width than you need that inner bead width. And honestly, I wouldn't run Hookless with less than 5, just from the testing that I've seen out there. And so, if you've got a 25 millimeter inner width, then your minimum tires really should be a 30. Vittoria's kind of solved this by making a 29 for their pro teams, and you can probably buy it now to match up with those rims, but those are rims and systems that, aerodynamically and otherwise were optimized for 28 millimeter tires. It's just not exactly safe to run that tire there. Now, the last thing I want to get into here, and I've got this clever little guy. I'd like to see this come back. This is called the DD standard. This is 20 plus years old now. A guy named Josh Dietz came up with that. A friend of mine, someone I've known in the industry for 20 plus years. And this thing is honestly what we really need to solve this problem, because one of the things that's happened, when you think of that number on the sidewall of the tire, that number is essentially nonsense, right? Different manufacturers will derive that sidewall width number from the circumferential wrapped length of the tire casing. So you put your tire section on here and you wrap it around, and then you can guess based on that inner width what the tire width will be. But things have happened. Like you look at the old GP4000s, those were all sized based on 15 millimeter inner bead width. And then Continental with the GP5000 went to sizing that based on a 17 millimeter width. And so a 28 in one model and a 28 in another model can have a different circumferential wrapped length because of where they occurred in time, right? What the new standard was from the industry. And that's before you even get into different brands use different standards. I mean, you can look at Bicycle Rolling Resistance. He has what they call lay flat casing width, where they smash the casing out and they just give you a direct measurement of the width when flat. And like right now in the top 20 tires, looking at the 28s, they range from 69 millimeters to 76 millimeters. And that means that on a given rim, he uses an 17.8, I think 18 millimeter inner width. He finds measurements of 28 millimeter tires, all modern ones, not looking at the older ones, but all the modern ones, on that particular rim will range between 26 and 30 millimeters as measured. But that's critical. I mean, the small end of those potentially will reduce the blow-off pressure significantly on a hookless rim of the 23 millimeter like the Hunt, even though they technically are 5 millimeters over the inner bead width. And so, again, this is where I think we've just made it way too complicated. You at home don't have one of these guys. The industry hasn't even standardized on using one of these guys, even though it should. And so industry, you hear me out. We need to bring this back or do something with it, because this is the number that matters, not some bullshit that somebody came up with and said, oh, on the 17.8 millimeter rim or a 19 millimeter rim. Well, that's not helpful to the customer, to the consumer, and it's not really helping us make decisions around safety and fitment when we're calling a number. This tire's 28, that tire's 28, and then you look and they have a 7 millimeter difference in their circumferential wrapped length of that casing. That's huge, 7 millimeters. It's a 10% difference from 69 to 76. 10%, that's crazy. So there you have it. Hookless road. Maybe scam was a bit of a strong word. I don't like it. I want to see it go away. If you're on it, be super careful. You really, like I said, I think the ETRTO now, they've adjusted it. After the initial hookless, I think they were allowing, in some cases, down to 3 millimeter gap. They've, I think, made it 4 is the minimum. I personally would not run less than a 5 millimeter gap. So 23, 28. I would look at your Bicycle Rolling Resistance, his measurements on that lay flat. I would not buy tires on the smaller end of that. The 69, 70, 71s, I would not use those on hookless. I would be buying the ones that are more in the 74, 75, 76. Or go with a 30 millimeter tire to be safe on that 23, right? If you're on the 25 millimeter internal, I'd probably be running a 32 on that for hookless. Last piece of this, hookless for gravel and mountain. Your tire is much, much bigger than the rim inner width on gravel and mountain. And so you get a lot more of that radially inward force. We'll put another diagram up for you to see that. But you can comfortably ride it there. So I still don't love it. I think just look at the force diagram here. Again, you've got all these radially outward forces. It just makes sense to me that you would put like a little sticky outy bit in the way of that bead to make it, not want to come off. But I've personally never seen a hookless gravel or mountain tire blow off. In the testing that we've done for rolling resistance, we, routinely go higher than you would run in those tires. I mean, again, you're running much lower pressures. But even as in testing, oftentimes, we'll do like every 5 psi, and so you might pick your ideal range and say, well, we're going to go 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, knowing that you would never run 55 or 60. I do with the hookless rims that we run. We always do an 80 psi data point, which is why we have had numerous ones blow off in that high 70s to right around 80. But again, with mountain and gravel, you're just never going up there. So yeah, there you have it. I hope we've covered it all. Please put your questions, comments below. I do these videos off the hip, so I'm sure I'm probably missing something, but get those questions down there and we will get them answered in a future video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.